Right.
Okay.
So So as I said, the PhD or the postgraduate planning process involves a series. Can we move to the next slide, please? The next slide. Yes, it involves 4 main stages: the definition of the research problem and focus, the breakdown of the work into its logical parts, and then you estimate the time for each stage, after which you will schedule the tasks and then you manage your time. And the time management is very critical. I'll take you through specifically what you have to do at each stage. So please, let's move on. Yeah, so first, you have to define the research problem and focus. As part of defining the research problem and focus, you always begin by identifying a research problem. I always say that the research title is actually a summary of the entire work. And so you always have to begin by first identifying a problem. Because as for the title, it can change. Titles get changed even at the end of the whole process. And so what is the area of conflict, or what is the area of concern or controversy that you want to research on? For PhD work, most of the time we are interested in the knowledge gap. And so what is the gap in the knowledge that you think your work will help, to fill that particular, gap? And then once you are able to identify a problem and it is well formulated, on the basis of that, you can have your title or your topic. And remember, the title is a summary of the entire thesis. And you have to do that in few words. It doesn't have to be verbose. So an effective title should attract the reader's interest and should be precise, specific, and descriptive. Once you've decided on the title based on your research problem, you go ahead and formulate your objective and the research question. What do you expect to achieve by the end of the study in general terms? Or what questions do you seek to answer? That's the research question. So you should have an objective. You should have your main objective, your specific objectives, and then your research questions. If it is a quantitative research, you would also have your hypothesis. Now, because in research, and more especially for PhD work, you cannot do everything. You need to have a focus. And so you have to clearly delineate the focus of your study. You have to narrow the study down so that you can accomplish it within the 3 or 4 years. And so how would your research be narrowed down? Typically, we have the delimitation. The delimitation talks about the boundaries that you have imposed on your work. For instance, the geographical area that you want to concentrate your study on, or the methodological, scope of your work, or the population, and so on and so forth. And so once you define the focus, you should also spell out the rationale. And you should have a very compelling reason why you want to research on such a topic. For instance, how would the research refine, revise, or extend the existing knowledge in the area that is being investigated? And how would the results of your study affect theory, practice, and policy? So you need to come out with a strong justification or rationale for carrying out such a study. So definitely the definition of the research problem and focus will help you to come out with a clear and researchable topic so that you can complete it within the stipulated time period. Please, let's move to the next slide. Next slide, please. There are a number of factors that we have to consider when we are formulating the problem, and by extension, when we are considering the topic. Please, let's move back. Okay, so The next slide, please. So the first issue you have to consider is your own personal interest. Many students have approached me that I should suggest a topic for them, and I have declined. I mean, my students will bear me out on that, because it should be a topic that you yourself, you are well motivated, to work on. It should be a topic that is of interest to you, not a topic that has been imposed on you by someone else. Once you have the motivation to work on that, it's likely you'll finish in good time and you'll be motivated to work towards completion. The other factor you have to consider is the feasibility of the topic. How feasible is it? Remember, your research will probably take 2 to 3 years. And so within that period, is it possible for you to complete that topic within the stipulated time? For instance, how can you, as a PhD candidate, undertake a longitudinal study, which will probably take about 10 years? It is not feasible within the time frame of your study. The other factor that you have to consider is the measurement of concepts. Yes, certain topics may be exciting, they may be, flowery and, very enchanting, but at the end of the day, can you operationalize your variables? Are these concepts measurable? Is it something that can be done? And so issues like happiness, joy, excitement, how are you going to measure them? You have to pick a topic that clearly is measurable. The other factor that you have to consider is the level of expertise. You as a person, you know your strengths and your weaknesses. And so if you are not particularly good in certain areas, maybe you are not good in qualitative research, you don't have to worry yourself. Again, by extension, you have to look at the expertise within your school, even among your supervisors, etc. Do they have the expertise to even guide you, to complete your work in good time? The other issue is relevance. How relevant is the topic? I mean, within the literature, the body of knowledge in that particular area, is it a subject that is of relevance? Is it going to add to the existing stock of knowledge? Does it have any scientific relevance? You have to consider that as well. You also have to consider the availability of data. Yes, we are in a COVID-19 era, and we all know that it is difficult going out there to collect, primary data. And so you ask yourself, what are the other options? Can I finish this within the remaining 2 years that I have, or the remaining 3 years that I have? So generally consider the availability of data. If the collection of data is going to be fraught with problems, then you have to advise yourself. In some cases, you may want to use secondary data. That is also acceptable. Secondary data is readily available. And so that is one important factor that you have to consider, or even the source of the data. Imagine you are collecting data from prostitutes. How easy is that going to be, to get the data? Then finally, you have to look at ethical issues. Remember, in most universities, there's an institutional review board that will look at your proposal and then give you ethical clearance. And so if your work is fraught with ethical issues, for instance, you are going to undertake an ethnographic study and you are not going to disclose your identity, your intention, or you are going to cause harm to other people, and so on and so forth. It is something that you have to look at in choosing a particular problem. According to Bertrand Russell, the greatest challenge to any thinker is stating the problem in a way that will allow. So the problem statement is critical, and it will help you to formulate the right topic for your research. Please, let's move on. So we are still on the research problem, because today our focus is on how to generate a research topic. And your research topic will always emanate from the problem that you are able to identify. So we need to first understand the purpose of research. If we understand this, it also helps us to come out with a suitable problem and a topic. So the purpose of research is to replicate an existing study in a different setting. So someone may have done a similar study in Malaysia or Philippines, and you want to replicate it in Nigeria. It is allowed because the contexts are different, and so it is likely you may have different results. In any case, if even your results are similar to that of Malaysia, then it only goes to reinforce that particular study. It strengthens the argument. So you'll still be contributing to the literature. Then also, another purpose is to explore an under-researched area. This is where you are doing a purely exploratory study. It is a gray area, an area that has not been well researched, but you want to extend the frontiers of knowledge in that area. So in that case, you do an exploratory study and then help to unearth some new phenomena, some new ideas that may not have existed earlier. It also may involve extending a previous study. You may have carried out a previous study when you were an undergraduate or when you were doing your master's and you want to extend it. You are allowed to do that. Or someone else may have done a study and you think that you can extend it. You can add some other variables, some other consequences, or some other antecedents. Again, another purpose would be to review the knowledge that has so far been gained in a particular area. And so in this particular instance, it means that you are going to conduct a systematic review and give us up-to-date knowledge in that area. So all the previous studies that have been carried out, you want to analyze and synthesize the results and conclusions. Then you want to also conduct research in order to develop or test out a methodology or a method. Yes, people have conducted studies in the past to develop an instrument for testing certain phenomena. So for instance, you can develop an instrument that will be used to test the impact of COVID-19 on hotels. That will be a significant contribution to the knowledge. And then to develop or to apply a theoretical idea to a real world problem. Theories are abstractions. They are used to explain phenomena. And you want to test those theories to find out whether in reality they hold true. So that can also be the focus of your research, where you try to test a theory. Most of the quantitative studies that we do, we test theories. Then there are sources where you can derive your research topic or your research problem. And one area is your own personal experience, because for somebody who is doing your graduate studies, it's assumed that you have some working experience, and you should be able to, reflect on your experience and then identify a topic that you can research on. You can also talk to experts. Experts have a wealth of knowledge in that particular area, and they can help you to unearth a topic that is researchable. Your own exposure to field situations can also help you to formulate a problem. Sometimes when you go to the field, either in the course of your duty or to collect data, you may be confronted with certain situations which you would think it is worth researchable. I remember some time ago, I and one of my colleagues, we were going around hotels in Accra, supervising our students who were on internship. And we realized that some of the hotels had very strange names. So we decided, why don't we conduct research to find out why people come out with those names? So this could be an example of a field exposure. It could also be through brainstorming, where you discuss with your colleagues and then arrive at a topic. Then other social issues that we are confronted with. We are confronted with many social issues. poverty, we are confronted with teenage pregnancy. Even at the workplace, we are confronted with issues like sexual harassment, work-life balance. Now we are confronted with COVID-19. These are social issues that are worth researching into. Then existing theories. There are a number of theories that you may want to test to see whether in reality they hold true. Then your own previous research. Maybe you may have done some research when you were doing your master's or at the undergrad level. You want to extend it. Then the literature. For me, the literature is one very important source of research topics or research problems. And I always advise students, when they bring me their proposal, I ask them, have you read the literature? For me, that is the first point. That will help you to identify the gaps and the areas that need further inquiry. Please, let's move on. Next slide, please. So, secondly, you break down your work into its logical units as part of the planning process. Once you've been able to come out with your research problem and the focus, the next thing you have to do is to break the work down. And for me, there are three main areas that you have to focus on. The first is obviously the literature review. And it starts right from the proposal writing. And the literature search, you have to search for literature from different sources. I'm sure in our subsequent lectures, we'll have a whole session on literature review. Then your own conceptual framework, which is the frame within which you are going to organize the entire work. You have to also look at that. That would dovetail into the literature review. Then the methodology, very important. What methods are you going to employ for data collection and data analysis? What instruments are you going to use? Are you going to design it yourself, or you are going to adopt an already existing scale? Then, if you want the instrument to be solid, more valid and reliable, you have to do a pre-test of the instrument. So all these things will dovetail into the data collection. And then the third component, which is the ultimate, is the final thesis. The thesis that you are going to submit to your school. And it also begins with the analysis of the data that you have collected. Once you analyze the data, you have to subject it to discussion, find discussion of the findings, and draw conclusions on your results. And then you have to submit your first draft to your supervisor, second draft. Some people will submit as many as 5 drafts before it is finally approved as good. Then in some universities, you will also be required to publish out of the final thesis before you graduate. So publication is also an essential component. So this is how you break down the work into its logical units. Please, let's move on to the next stage. Then you estimate the time for each stage. So for instance, this is a Gantt chart. We typically use the Gantt chart to organize, the work, break it down into its logical units, and then assign specific time periods within which we are going to accomplish those tasks. So in this particular instance, the candidate will start from 2020, 2021, then 2020, 2022. So from 2020 to 2022, I guess the candidate has already finished with the coursework and is now focusing on the research. So the problem formulation and topic will take 2 months, from September to October. Then the writing of the proposal up to December, then the literature review, followed by the methodology. And in doing so, you have to be very realistic. You don't have to assign a time that you think will not be adequate, or a time that you think is just too much. You see over here, the candidate assigns 3 months for data collection. And I even think that 3 months may be short, especially in this era. So once you have come out with the schedule and estimate of time for each stage, you move on to the next stage. Please, let's move on. And in the next stage, This is where you are going to schedule the tasks and manage your time. It is a very important stage because this is where the actual work has to be done. But most of the things that you have to do will precede the scheduling of the tasks and the time. So for instance, you have to prioritize. Make sure you do the most important things first. You know that without ethical clearance, you cannot proceed. Please do ethical clearance first before you even proceed. Then estimate the time, as we saw in the previous slide. Schedule your activities and tasks in a very logical manner. You don't schedule in such a way that they will cross over, but in a very logical sequence. Then balance your time, your leisure time, and then the time that you allocate for your work. Because one of the things that really affects postgraduate students is stress and burnout. It is important that as much as possible, we try to balance our time. Seek peer support. Your colleagues can also help you in the course of your work. You know their strengths and their weaknesses. Some of them are very good in data analysis. Some of them are very good in writing and so on and so forth. You can help each other out, else you will suffer from isolation. So to avoid the issue of isolation, make sure you connect with your peers and you help each other. Sometimes some students bring their work to you and you are like, these are very basic mistakes that if the person had given it to a colleague, those mistakes would have been corrected. Then know your supervisors. Who are your supervisors? If you have only one supervisor, or in some institutions where you have a team or you have a co-supervisor, try your best to know them because we are all not the same. For instance, you should know the medium through which your supervisor will prefer that you contact him or her, so that you don't call your supervisor in the middle of the night. You should know, for instance, his style of writing. Read some of his articles, read some of his publications, know him, try to get in touch with him and establish that rapport with your supervisor, because the supervisors play a key role in the completion of the work. So it is important to establish that rapport and to know him or her or them. Then you should also know the policies, regulations, and guidelines of the school, so that right from day one, you know that you are on track. You don't go and write anything, present it, only to find out that that is not the style of your university. Every university has its own style. So try as much as possible to acquaint yourself with the policies, regulations, and guidelines. And try and network with other students, network with other experts in other parts of the world. These days, we have a lot of social media platforms. For instance, we have ResearchGate. And I have had a number of students contacting me from different parts of the world through ResearchGate. Some of them even send me their work to help them, and I do that willingly. So try and network. And also read. I always tell students that they should read. Read the literature. Read other people's theses so that you know how it is organized. And then learn to write. Academic writing is different from journalism or fiction writing. So learn how to write. And there are a number of resources. Some universities also organize training for students. And then be proactive. Don't say, I'll do it tomorrow, or this can wait. Always try, even when your supervisor has not finished looking at your chapter, you can proceed with the next chapter. And then as time goes on, when you get feedback from him, you are able to improve upon it. So try and be proactive. These things will help you to manage your time. Please, let's move on. So finally, I want to quickly run you through the research proposal, because I believe the research proposal is the planning document for postgraduate students. Even though in most cases, the proposal is submitted when you are applying for admission, you realize that once you are admitted onto the program, your proposal will undergo certain changes with the support of your advisors or your supervisors. Please, let's move on. And so the research proposal should have substance, the broad topic that you would like to research on, and then the aims and activities, what the research will set out to achieve. It should also have the methodology, how you will go about researching, and how you will undertake the research within the time available, which is the time frame, which I illustrated with the Gantt chart. Please, let's move on. So essentially, the purpose of the research proposal is to convince others that you have a worthwhile research project. So the justification is very important. Again, to receive approval to write your thesis or dissertation. In most universities, the student is required to present the proposal and pass an oral presentation before he or she can proceed. And so it's a very important document. It also helps you to communicate your intention and make clear the purpose of the intended study and its justification. And then finally, it helps you to provide a step-by-step plan for conducting your study. Please, let's move on. So finally, this is the structure of your proposal, the key ingredients, the introduction or the background, where you have to provide a description of the topic and the variables, the relevant literature, the problem statement, objectives, your research questions, hypothesis, significance, limitations, and delimitations. Then for a proposal, we don't expect you to go deep into the literature, but at least you should outline the theories and then the subtopics that you are going to work on, as well as your conceptual framework within which you organize the entire work. Then your methodology, which will clearly spell out the research philosophy and design, the data collection and analysis techniques, conceptualization and operationalization of your variables, and other ethical considerations. Then fourthly, your time frame for the study should be clearly spelled out. It should be within the period that you are allowed to do the PhD work. And then finally, you should have your references. So in effect, this is how your plan document should look like. And it should incorporate all the issues that I have discussed previously. Please, let's move on. So once again, I want to thank you for your attention and thank you for having me.